The afternoon sun was beating down on the concrete parking lot of Westfield Shopping Center. Cars filled almost every spot as people rushed in and out of stores, their arms full of shopping bags. It was one of those busy Saturday afternoons when everyone seemed to be running errands at the same time. Patricia wiped the sweat from her forehead as she walked toward her white SUV. She had just finished grocery shopping for the week, and her arms were getting tired from carrying the heavy bags. All she wanted to do was load everything into her car and head home to her air-conditioned house. As she approached her vehicle, something caught her eye. There was a young man sitting in a dark blue sedan parked just 2 spaces away from hers. He looked to be in his late teens, wearing a gray hoodie despite the warm weather. His head was down, looking at his phone, and he seemed to be just sitting there waiting. Patricia slowed her pace and glanced around nervously. She had heard too many stories on the news about car break-ins and robberies happening in broad daylight. Just last month, her neighbor had told her about someone trying to steal her purse right in a parking lot similar to this one. The young man hadn't moved from his spot. He was still sitting there, occasionally looking up and scanning the parking lot before returning his attention to his phone. Patricia noticed he kept checking the time and looking toward the main entrance of the shopping center. Something didn't feel right to her. Why would someone just sit in their car like that? Most people either got out to shop or they drove away. But this teenager was just sitting there, watching people come and go. Patricia's mind started racing with possibilities, none of them good. She tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself she was probably overreacting. But as she got closer to her car, she couldn't help but notice how the young man's eyes seemed to follow other shoppers. Every time someone walked by with shopping bags, he would look up from his phone and watch them. Patricia fumbled with her keys, her hands starting to shake slightly. She had parked in this same lot hundreds of times before and never felt this uneasy. But something about today felt different. Maybe it was because there seemed to be fewer people around this section of the parking lot, or maybe it was because the young man had been sitting there for what felt like a long time. She decided to take her time loading her groceries, hoping the teenager would eventually drive away. But as she placed bag after bag into her trunk, he remained in the same spot. If anything, he seemed to be paying even more attention to the people walking by. Patricia's heart started beating faster. She thought about her own teenage son at home, and how she would feel if someone was targeting him. The protective instinct that every parent knows kicked in, but it was mixed with a growing fear for her own safety. The young man looked up again, this time making brief eye contact with Patricia, before quickly looking away. That was enough to send her anxiety through the roof. In her mind, that look confirmed her worst fears. He was definitely watching people, and now he had noticed her too. She tried to calm herself down by thinking logically. Maybe he was just waiting for someone. Maybe his parent or friend was inside shopping and he was the designated driver. But then again, why would he be looking around so much if he was just innocently waiting? Patricia closed her trunk and walked around to the driver's side of her car. But she didn't get in. Instead, she stood there for a moment, pretending to check her phone while keeping an eye on the teenager. He was still there, still watching, still making her feel uncomfortable. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that something wasn't right. She had watched enough crime shows to know that criminals often scout parking lots, looking for easy targets. They would sit and watch for people who looked distracted or vulnerable, especially those carrying expensive purses or shopping bags from high-end stores. Patricia looked down at her own shopping bags and realized she probably looked like the perfect target. She was alone, middle-aged, and clearly had money to spend based on where she had been shopping. If someone was looking for a victim, she would fit the profile perfectly. The teenage boy checked his phone again and looked toward the shopping center entrance. This time Patricia was sure she saw him scan the parking lot in a way that seemed calculated and deliberate. He wasn't just casually looking around like someone who was bored. This felt different. Her mind made up, Patricia decided she couldn't just ignore her instincts. Too many women had been hurt because they didn't trust their gut feelings when something seemed wrong. She had always taught her own children to speak up if they felt unsafe, and now it was time to follow her own advice. She pulled out her phone and moved a little closer to her car, trying to look casual while keeping the teenager. In her peripheral vision, Her finger hovered over the emergency contact screen as she debated what to do next. The shopping center had security guards, but Patricia wasn't sure if they would take her concerns seriously. After all, the young man wasn't technically doing anything wrong by sitting in his car, but every instinct she had was telling her that his behavior wasn't normal. Patricia took a deep breath and decided to trust her gut. She had lived in this community for over 15 years and had never felt this kind of unease in such a public place. If her instincts were wrong, then no harm would be done. But if she was right and something bad was about to happen, she would never forgive herself for not acting. The teenager looked up one more time, and this time his gaze lingered on Patricia for just a second longer than felt comfortable. That was the final sign she needed. Whatever was about to happen, she wasn't going to wait around to find out. Patricia's hands were trembling as she made her decision. She couldn't just drive away and potentially leave other innocent people in danger. If this young man was really planning something, someone needed to take action before it was too late. She walked toward the blue sedan, her heart pounding with each step. The teenager noticed her approach and looked up from his phone with a confused expression. Up close, Patricia could see he was probably around 17 or 18 years old, with neat hair and no visible tattoos or anything that screamed trouble. But appearances could be deceiving, she reminded herself. "Excuse me," Patricia said, trying to keep her voice steady and authoritative. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" The young man looked genuinely surprised by the question. He glanced around, as if making sure she was talking to him before responding. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" "You've been sitting here for quite a while just watching people," Patricia continued, her confidence growing now that she had started the conversation. "It's making some of us shoppers feel uncomfortable." The teenager's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "I'm just waiting for my mom. She's shopping inside." He gestured toward the main entrance of the shopping center. Patricia studied his face, looking for any signs that he was lying. His answer seemed rehearsed to her, too quick and too convenient. "Which store is she in?" she pressed. "The medical supply store," he replied without hesitation. "She's a doctor and needed to pick up some equipment for her office." This answer only made Patricia more suspicious. A medical supply store? That seemed like an oddly specific lie. Most teenagers wouldn't even know what a medical supply store was, let alone come up with that as a cover story. She was becoming more convinced that something was definitely not right about this situation. "How long has she been in there?" Patricia asked, crossing her arms over her chest to appear more intimidating. The young man checked his phone. "About 20 minutes. She said it might take a while because they had to get some stuff from the back." Patricia shook her head. 20 minutes was a long time to just sit in a car, especially on such a hot day. Most parents would have their kids come inside with them, or they would wait somewhere with air conditioning. The story wasn't adding up in her mind. "Look," she said, her voice becoming firmer. "I don't know what you're really doing here, but your behavior is suspicious. You keep looking around at people and their shopping bags. That's not what someone does when they're just innocently waiting." The teenager's expression changed from confusion to frustration. "Ma'am, I really am just waiting for my mom. I'm not doing anything wrong." "Then why won't you just leave?" Patricia demanded. "If you're making people uncomfortable, the decent thing to do would be to wait somewhere else." "Because my mom told me to wait right here," he replied, his voice showing the first signs of irritation. "She's going to come out that door and she'll be looking for me in this exact spot." Patricia felt her anger rising. The young man's refusal to cooperate was only confirming her suspicions. An innocent person would apologize and move to make others feel more comfortable. The fact that he was being stubborn and argumentative was a red flag. "I'm going to ask you one more time to move along," she said, pulling out her phone. "If you don't, I'm calling security." The teenager stared at her in disbelief. "You're going to call security because I'm sitting in my car waiting for my mom?" "I'm calling security because you're loitering and making people feel unsafe," Patricia shot back. "This is private property and they have the right to ask you to leave." The young man ran his hand through his hair, clearly frustrated by the escalating situation. "Ma'am, please. I understand you might be concerned, but I promise you I'm not doing anything wrong. My mom will be out soon and then we'll leave. Patricia was not convinced. In her experience, criminals were often very good at appearing innocent and reasonable. They knew how to manipulate situations to their advantage. The fact that this teenager was being so calm and polite almost made her more suspicious, not less. That's exactly what someone would say if they were up to no good, she said, already starting to dial. I've heard enough excuses. The teenager's eyes widened as he realized she was actually going to follow through with her threat. Wait, please don't. You're going to get me in trouble for literally nothing. But Patricia had made up her mind. She pressed the number for shopping center, security, and waited for someone to answer. When the security guard picked up, she spoke loudly enough for the teenager to hear every word. Hi, this is Patricia Williams and I'm in your parking lot right now. There's a suspicious individual who's been loitering here for over 20 minutes, just watching shoppers. He's refusing to leave when asked and I'm concerned for everyone's safety. The teenager put his head in his hands and let out a long sigh. This is unbelievable, he muttered. Yes, I'll stay on the line. Patricia continued, into the phone. He's in a dark blue sedan about 2 rows back from the main entrance. Young male, late teens, wearing a gray hoodie. After hanging up, Patricia stood her ground a few feet away from the car, keeping watch like a sentinel. The teenager had stopped, trying to argue with her, and was now just sitting quietly, occasionally shaking his head in apparent disbelief. You know, he said after a few minutes of silence, you could have just asked nicely if I could explain what I was doing, instead of immediately assuming the worst. Patricia scoffed. I did ask nicely. You're the one who got defensive and refused to cooperate. I answered your questions honestly, the young man replied. I told you exactly what I was doing and why I was here, but you didn't believe me. Because your story doesn't make sense, Patricia said. What kind of teenager sits in a hot car for 20 minutes when they could wait inside an air-conditioned building? The young man gestured to his phone. Because I'm playing a game and I didn't want to bother anyone inside. Plus, my mom specifically told me to wait in the car so she could find me easily when she was done. Patricia rolled her eyes. Of course, he would have an answer for everything. That's exactly what someone would do if they had prepared their story in advance. The fact that he was so ready with explanations for every question only made her more certain that something wasn't right. In the distance, she could see a security guard walking toward them across the parking lot. Finally, someone with authority would be able to handle this situation properly. Patricia felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that she had done the right thing by speaking up when something seemed suspicious. The security guard approached with a measured pace, his radio crackling. Softly on his belt, Officer Rodriguez had been working at Westfield Shopping Center for over 5 years and had seen his fair share of parking lot disputes. Most of them turned out to be misunderstandings, but he always took every call seriously. Good afternoon, he said, nodding to both Patricia and the teenager. I understand there's some kind of concern here. Patricia immediately stepped forward, her voice filled with conviction. Thank you for coming so quickly. This young man has been sitting here for at least 30 minutes just watching shoppers. When I asked him to move along, he became argumentative and refused to leave. Officer Rodriguez turned to the teenager, who was now standing beside his car with his hands visible and a look of resigned frustration on his face. What's your side of the story, son? Sir, I'm just waiting for my mother, the young man said respectfully. She's inside the medical supply store picking up equipment for her practice. She told me to wait right here so she could find me when she was done. The security guard nodded thoughtfully. This was already sounding like a typical misunderstanding, but he needed to be thorough. Do you have any identification with you? The teenager reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, extracting his driver's license. Yes, sir, here it is. Officer Rodriguez examined the license carefully. The name read David Chen, age 17, with an address in the upscale Maple Heights neighborhood just 10 minutes away. The photo matched perfectly, and the license was clearly legitimate. Patricia watched this exchange with growing impatience. Anyone can have a fake ID, she said. The point is that his behavior has been suspicious and threatening. Threatening? David's voice cracked slightly. I never threatened anyone. I've been sitting in my car the whole time. Officer Rodriguez held up his hand to calm both parties. Let's take this step by step. David, you said your mother is shopping inside. Do you know approximately what time she went in? David checked his phone. She went in around 2:15. She said it might take up to 45 minutes because they had to special order some equipment and it was being delivered today. The security guard looked at his watch. It was currently 2:50, which meant the timeline was reasonable. And you've been waiting in the car this entire time? Yes, sir. I was playing a game on my phone and listening to music with my earbuds, David explained. I wasn't paying attention to anyone else until this lady came over and started questioning. Me? Patricia felt her frustration mounting. That's not true. I saw him watching people walk by. He was clearly scanning for potential targets. Targets for what? Officer Rodriguez asked, genuinely curious about her specific concerns. Car break-ins, purse snatching, who knows what else, Patricia replied. Young men like him often case parking lots looking for easy victims. David's mouth fell open at the accusation. Young men like me? What's that supposed to mean? Officer Rodriguez sensed the conversation was heading in a problematic direction. Ma'am, I need you to be very specific about what behavior you actually observed that seemed suspicious. Patricia thought for a moment, realizing she needed to be more precise. He kept looking up from his phone and watching people. Every time someone walked by with shopping bags, he would look at them. That's not normal behavior for someone who's just waiting. I was looking around because I was bored, David said, his voice showing clear frustration now. When you're sitting in a car for 30 minutes, you naturally look at things happening around you. That doesn't make me a criminal. Officer Rodriguez had handled enough of these situations to recognize what was likely happening. The woman was genuinely concerned for safety, but her fears seemed to be based more on assumptions than actual threatening behavior. David, I'm going to need to verify your story, he said diplomatically. Do you have your mother's phone number, so we can contact her? Of course, David said, pulling up his contacts. Her name is Dr. Angela Chen. She's a pediatric surgeon at Children's Hospital. Patricia crossed her arms skeptically. Of course he has a fake contact set up. These criminals think of everything. Officer Rodriguez was starting to lose patience with Patricia's attitude, but he remained professional. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to let me handle this investigation. He dialed the number David had provided. After a few rings, a professional-sounding woman answered. Dr. Chen's phone, this is Angela. Dr. Chen, this is Officer Rodriguez with Westfield Shopping Center Security. I'm here with a young man who says he's your son, David, and I need to verify that he's supposed to be waiting for you in our parking lot. There was a brief pause. Yes, that's correct. David is waiting in the car while I'm picking up some medical equipment. Is there some kind of problem? Just a routine check, ma'am. How much longer do you expect to be? I should be done in about 10 or 15 minutes. They're just finishing up the paperwork for my order. Officer Rodriguez thanked her and hung up. He turned to Patricia with a diplomatic smile. Well, the story checks out. His mother confirmed that he's supposed to be waiting there. Patricia's face flushed red. Anyone could have been on that phone. You don't know for sure that was actually his mother. David stared at her in disbelief. You think I have someone pretending to be my mom just so I can sit in a parking lot? I've seen stranger things, Patricia said defensively, though her voice was losing some of its earlier conviction. Officer Rodriguez was beginning to feel sympathy for David, who had remained calm and respectful throughout the entire encounter, despite being falsely accused. Ma'am, I understand your concerns about safety, but this young man has done nothing wrong. He has legitimate identification. His story has been verified by the person he claims to be waiting for, and he's been cooperative throughout this entire process. Patricia looked around the parking lot, suddenly feeling less certain about her position. Other shoppers were starting to notice the commotion, and she was beginning to realize how the situation might look to outside observers. But what about the way he was watching people? She asked, her voice becoming smaller. Looking around in a public space isn't illegal or suspicious, Officer Rodriguez explained patiently. People naturally observe their surroundings, especially when they're waiting somewhere for an extended period. David finally spoke up, his voice tired but still respectful. Ma'am, I'm sorry if I somehow made you feel uncomfortable. That was never my intention. I was just trying to pass time while waiting for my mom. Patricia didn't know how to respond. The reasonable tone of his apology was making her question whether she had overreacted to the entire situation. Just as Officer Rodriguez was about to wrap up the situation, the automatic doors of the shopping center opened, and a woman in professional attire emerged. She was carrying a large bag from the medical supply store and looking around the parking lot with a slight frown of concern. David immediately perked up and waved. "Mom, over here!" Dr. Angela Chen spotted her son and began walking toward the group, her expression shifting from mild concern to alarm as she noticed the security guard and the obvious tension in the air. She was an elegant woman in her mid-40s, wearing a crisp navy blazer and carrying herself with the confidence that came from years of making life-and-death decisions in operating rooms. "David, what's going on here?" she asked as she approached, her voice carrying the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to taking charge of difficult situations. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. "Dr. Chen, I presume? I'm Officer Rodriguez with Shopping Center Security. We had a report of suspicious activity and needed to verify that your son was legitimately waiting for you." Dr. Chen's eyebrows raised as she looked from the security guard to Patricia, who was suddenly feeling very uncomfortable under the scrutiny of this obviously successful and professional woman. "Suspicious activity," Dr. Chen repeated, her voice remaining calm but with an edge that suggested she was not pleased. "What kind of suspicious activity?" Patricia found herself unable to meet Dr. Chen's direct gaze. The confidence she had felt earlier was rapidly evaporating as she realized the full scope of what had just happened. Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat diplomatically. This lady was concerned because David had been waiting in the car for an extended period, and she felt his behavior was suspicious. Dr. Chen turned her full attention to Patricia, studying her with the same intense focus she might use when examining a patient's symptoms. "I see. And what exactly did my son do that seemed suspicious to you?" Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. He was sitting in his car for a long time, and he kept looking around at people." "Looking around at people?" Dr. Chen repeated slowly, as if she was trying to understand a particularly complex medical diagnosis, while sitting in his own car, in a public parking lot. The way she said it made Patricia realize how ridiculous her concerns sounded when stated so plainly. David was standing next to his mother now, and the family resemblance was unmistakable. More importantly, seeing them together made it obvious that this was exactly what David had claimed all along: a teenager waiting for his parent to finish shopping. "I was concerned for everyone's safety," Patricia said weakly, her earlier conviction completely gone. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate that people want to look out for each other's safety. But I have to ask, what specifically about my son's appearance or behavior led you to conclude he was dangerous?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Patricia looked at David again, really seeing him for the first time. He was clean-cut, well-dressed, and had been nothing but polite throughout the entire encounter. His car was newer and well-maintained. There was absolutely nothing about him that suggested criminal intent. I just had a feeling something wasn't right," Patricia stammered, realizing how weak that sounded. Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. "A feeling based on what exactly?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my son was approached and harassed for the crime of being a young person existing in a public space." Officer Rodriguez sensed the conversation was heading toward uncomfortable territory. "Dr. Chen, I want you to know that David handled himself very well throughout this entire situation. He was respectful and cooperative. I would expect nothing less from him," Dr. Chen replied, placing a protective hand on her son's shoulder. "David has been taught to be respectful to authority figures and to de-escalate situations when possible, but that doesn't mean he should have to endure harassment while doing something as simple as waiting for his mother." Patricia felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She was beginning to understand that she had made a significant error in judgment, but she wasn't sure how to gracefully extract herself from the situation. I was just trying to be cautious, she said quietly. Dr. Chen studied Patricia's face carefully, as if she was trying to determine the best course of treatment for a difficult case. Mrs. Williams. Patricia Williams. Mrs. Williams, I understand. The desire to be cautious. As a mother myself, I know what it's like to worry about safety. But I have to wonder, would you have had the same reaction if David had been a different color? The question hit Patricia like a physical blow. She wanted to immediately deny that race had played any role in her thinking, but the words wouldn't come, because now that Dr. Chen had said it out loud, Patricia was forced to confront the uncomfortable possibility that her assumptions had been influenced by factors she didn't want to acknowledge. I would have reacted the same way to anyone acting suspiciously, Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. David finally spoke up, his voice quiet but clear. Mrs. Williams, I sit in parking lots waiting for my parents all the time. This is the first time anyone has ever called security on me. The simple statement carried more weight than any accusation could have. Patricia found herself thinking about her own teenage son and trying to imagine him being confronted by a stranger and having the police called on him for sitting in a car. The thought made her stomach churn. Dr. Chen continued to study Patricia with the same clinical attention she might give to a patient presenting with concerning symptoms. Mrs. Williams, I want you to know that this kind of interaction can be very damaging to young people. David will remember this experience for the rest of his life, not because he did anything wrong, but because he learned that simply existing in public can make him a target for suspicion. Patricia felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as the full impact of her actions started to sink in. This wasn't just about one uncomfortable encounter in a parking lot. This was about a young man's sense of safety and belonging in his own community. I'm sorry, she whispered, finally meeting David's eyes. I made a mistake. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward, sensing an opportunity to help both parties move forward constructively. Dr. Chen, I want to assure you that this incident will be documented properly. And Mrs. Williams, I hope this experience will help you think differently about similar situations in the future. Dr. Chen nodded appreciatively at the security guard's professionalism, but her attention remained focused on Patricia. The doctor seemed to be weighing whether to push the point further or to allow the natural consequences of embarrassment and regret to serve as sufficient education. Dr. Chen looked at Patricia with a mixture of disappointment and something that might have been compassion. As a physician, she had learned that sometimes the most important healing happened not through harsh treatment, but through helping people understand the consequences of their actions. Mrs. Williams, she said carefully, I can see that you're genuinely sorry, and I appreciate that. But I need you to understand something important. This isn't the first time something like this has happened to David. Patricia's eyes widened in surprise. It's not? David shifted uncomfortably beside his mother, clearly not eager to relive other uncomfortable experiences. But Dr. Chen continued, her voice steady and educational, rather than accusatory. Last month, David was stopped by police while walking in our own neighborhood because someone reported a suspicious person near their house. He was coming home from his friend's house 3 blocks away. 2 months before that, a store employee followed him around for 20 minutes, convinced he was going to steal something. He ended up buying a birthday gift for his girlfriend with his own money. Patricia felt her heart sinking further with each example. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern that this young man had to navigate regularly. But he seems like such a nice kid, Patricia said, immediately realizing how that sounded. Dr. Chen nodded patiently. He is a nice kid. He's on the honor roll, volunteers at the animal shelter, and has never been in trouble with the law. But being nice doesn't protect him from people's assumptions. Officer Rodriguez was taking notes, partly for his incident report, but also because he was learning something important about how these situations affected the people involved. In his 5 years of security work, he had never really considered the cumulative impact of multiple false accusations on a young person. David, Dr. Chen said gently, would you like to tell Mrs. Williams how these experiences make you feel? David hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with being put on the spot. But after a moment, he looked directly at Patricia and began to speak. "It makes me scared to go places by myself," he said quietly. "I always have to think about how my actions might be misinterpreted. Like, I can't just relax and be a normal teenager. I have to constantly worry about whether someone is going to see me as a threat." Patricia felt tears streaming down her cheeks now. She thought about her own son, who had never once expressed anxiety about going to the mall or waiting in a parking lot or walking through their neighborhood. The idea that any young person should have to live with that kind of constant vigilance was heartbreaking. "I never thought about it that way," she admitted. "I was just focused on my own safety." Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. "I understand that personal safety is important, but there's a difference between being appropriately cautious and making assumptions based on stereotypes. The question you need to ask yourself is, what specifically made you feel unsafe?" Patricia thought carefully before responding. "Honestly, looking back now, nothing specific. He wasn't doing anything threatening. He wasn't even looking at me until I approached him. I think I made assumptions." "Based on what?" Dr. Chen pressed gently. Patricia struggled with the answer because it forced her to confront some uncomfortable truths about her own thought processes. Based on things that had nothing to do with his actual behavior. David looked surprised by her honesty. Throughout this entire ordeal, he had expected denial and defensiveness, not this kind of genuine self-reflection. Officer Rodriguez decided to step in with some practical guidance. "Mrs. Williams, in the future, if you have concerns about someone's behavior, I'd recommend contacting security first rather than approaching the person directly, and try to be specific about what actions seem threatening, not just general feelings of unease." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "That's good advice. And David, you handled this situation exactly right. You stayed calm, you were respectful, and you didn't escalate the conflict even when you had every right to be angry." "I was angry," David admitted, "but my parents taught me that getting angry in situations like this usually just makes things worse." Patricia realized that David had shown more maturity and wisdom in the last hour than she had. Despite being falsely accused and publicly humiliated, he had remained composed and dignified throughout the entire encounter. "David, I owe you a real apology," Patricia said, her voice stronger now. "Not just for today, but for being the kind of person who would make you feel unsafe in your own community. That's not who I want to be." Dr. Chen studied Patricia's face carefully, assessing the sincerity of her words the same way she might evaluate a patient's commitment to following a treatment plan. "Apologies are important," Dr. Chen said finally. "But what matters more is what you do with this experience going forward." Patricia nodded earnestly. "You're right. I need to think about why I reacted the way I did and make sure it doesn't happen again." Officer Rodriguez looked at his watch and realized the incident had taken up most of his shift, but he felt like he had learned something valuable that would help him handle similar situations in the future. "If there's nothing else," he said diplomatically, "I think we can consider this matter resolved." Dr. Chen picked up her medical supply bag and gestured toward David. "Come on, son, let's go home." As they began walking toward their car, Patricia called out, "Dr. Chen? David?" They turned back to face her. "Thank you," Patricia said simply, "for helping me understand." Dr. Chen nodded once, acknowledging the thanks but clearly still processing her own emotions about the encounter. David gave a small wave, showing a grace and forgiveness that Patricia knew she didn't deserve but was grateful to receive. As Patricia watched them drive away, she stood alone in the parking lot trying to process everything that had just happened. She thought about going home and pretending the whole incident had never occurred, but she knew that would be taking the easy way out. Instead, she pulled out her phone and began typing a message to her teenage son. She wanted to have a conversation with him about assumptions and prejudice and the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. It wasn't going to be an easy conversation, but it was one that needed to happen. Patricia realized that this experience had forced her to confront some uncomfortable truths about herself, but maybe that discomfort was necessary for growth. Maybe this was exactly the kind of wake-up call she needed to become a better person and a better member of her community. As she finally got into her car and drove home, Patricia knew that she would never forget this day, and she hoped that by learning from her mistakes, she could help ensure that other young people like David wouldn't have to endure the same kind of unfair treatment in the future.